Everybody has regrets. It's one of the most common emotions that people have. Give me any regret that any of your listeners have. I'll find it in 15 seconds in the database.
Daniel Pink is the author of 5 New York Times bestsellers, including the latest, The Power of Regret. Daniel's books have won multiple awards, have been translated to 46 languages, and have sold millions of copies around the world.
You know, if you hit age 50, you likely have more of your life behind you than ahead of you. We have this database now of 26,000 regrets from people in 134 countries. These 4 regrets are incredibly common around the world. There are foundation regrets, which are decisions that people make. They're not devastating up front, but that accumulate to bad consequences. There's regrets of but boldness. There's moral regrets. And then there are, in the architecture of regret, there can be 2 kinds of regrets. There are regrets of action and regrets of inaction. As we age, there are more inaction regrets than action regrets.
So once you find that regret, what do you do?
First of all, treat yourself with kindness. Number 2.
Daniel, I'm so excited to have you.
I'm so glad to be here, Ilana. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. So I am going to take you back in time, and I want to hear a little bit of Daniel the kid. Like, what sparked that love for writing, for books? What planted that seed?
Well, I think the love of books preceded the love of writing. When I was growing up, I didn't say, oh, I want to grow up and be a writer. I don't think that was like my main goal. A lot of life, as you know, as all of us know, is about circumstance. And I happened to, when I was 6, early in first grade, my father got a new job. And we moved from Wilmington, Delaware, where I was born, to Columbus, Ohio, where I grew up. And it just so happens that Ohio in general and Central Ohio in particular have an amazing public library system. And as a consequence, I grew up a short walk away from an excellent local public library and a very easy bus ride away from a massive and majestic Carnegie-funded city massive public library. And so as a kid, both of my parents were readers. As a kid, I went to the library a lot, not because I had to, not because somebody was forcing me, because it was good. I liked it. And also, truly, in the summer, the library had air conditioning, and my house did not have air conditioning. And it was kind of cooler in there. And so I grew up going to the library a lot. And as a consequence, I grew up reading a lot. And being a reader was actually a big part of who I was as a kid. And I think that had I not grown up in a place where I had such immediate access to fantastic public libraries, I don't think I would be a writer today. I really don't. I think I would have done something else.
That is incredible. Incredible. And interesting why they have such a beautiful library system. That's something
it has to do. I don't want to have all your listeners completely click out of here. It has to do with the unique way that Ohio, unlike other states, funds public libraries.
So interesting. Okay.
Ohio has essentially a dedicated fund for public libraries, which means that Ohio libraries are among the best in the country.
Incredible. I did not know that. So, but then you actually went to something very, very different to study in college, right? You graduated Northern University in linguistics, and then you went to Yale Law School. First of all, why law? But I think at really early age or really early, you realize that this is not it, right? This is not the thing. So tell us a little bit.
Yeah. So just to take a step back, when I was maybe like 9 or 10, what I really wanted to do, I did have a career aspiration. I mean, my original career aspiration was to play both Major League Baseball and the NBA. And it seemed, by the time I was 10, it seemed like that dream was not going to come true. And so the other thing that I would do when I was much younger is when I was actually in elementary school and even in junior high, what we now call middle school, I was actually in a lot of plays and actually wrote a lot of plays, curiously enough. And when I was maybe like 10 or 11 or 12, you would ask me what I wanted to do. I would say, I think I want to write and direct movies.
Wow.
But then I kind of abandoned that. not kind of, I did abandon that in part because I was also pretty good in school, because school was actually really easy. Because when I went to school, basically all you had to do was be compliant and give the authority figure what they wanted on time, neatly, and you were suddenly, quote, a good student. And so for whatever bizarre reasons of personality and insecurity, I was a good student, and the good students typically didn't participate in the arts. Those are two different worlds. And so I went that way, and I was a good student because it was so easy, because the system was so stupid. And so I ended up in college. So I went to college, and college is different because college you can actually learn something. College I can actually learn something. And pursue what I wanted to pursue. And I ended up pursuing linguistics just because I was sort of the perfect combination for me, and that it was obviously about language, but it was also it was a combination. I would simultaneously be in classes with linguistics classes, literally like from one to another, with computer science majors, the early computer science majors. There's certain kinds of syntactical courses in linguistics that are also the core of computer science. And then I would also be in classes with like poetry students, because there's other aspects of linguistics that were very literary. And so the combination of sort of the math and the literary was fantastic for me. I loved it. And then I went to law school largely because I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and I was like a middle-class kid who went to college on financial aid, and was concerned that I needed to make a living.
Right.
And that was the way to do it. And I wasn't good in, I didn't want to be a doctor, and I didn't want to be an engineer. And so
that was my life. I had three choices. It was two, and then engineering came. I could be a doctor or a lawyer, or then
it's a very common pattern among American middle class people. One generation removed from, or zero to one generations removed from coming to this country without any money,
right.
Or anybody who wants to try to get a stronger foothold into the middle class. And so I did that, and I was also deeply interested in politics at the time, and I went to law school, and it's like I'm not, once I figured out what lawyers did, it's like I'm not doing this, and it was too boring. It's like, I'm not doing this. And even if it makes a lot of money, I'm not going to do this. And so I happened to be fortunate in that my law school had a program where if you went to work upon graduation and you earned below a certain salary, no matter what you did, they would help subsidize the repayment of your student loans. And again, circumstantial. But for that, I maybe would have gone to practice law to pay off my student loans, but that allowed me not to do that, and so I ended up working. I started working on political campaigns because that's actually what I was deeply interested in doing, and that took me to some early work in politics.
Before that, so what sparked that love for politics? Was there like a specific moment, or was there just?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, part of it is that it was kind of exciting. I was a big sports fan, so it's sort of like sports, and it was about something that mattered. Right. It was about like how we're going to run things, and so the stakes were the stakes were high. I thought that the issues were pretty substantive. So I found it, I found politics like super interesting when I was, probably starting in.
Right.
High school, and then, into.
So all throughout college. Interesting.
Yeah. So, but I didn't major in political science or anything like that. I just, I was deeply interested in politics, and I felt that it was, substantively interesting and also important because there were things happening then that I thought were messed up, and I didn't want them to happen.
I won't talk about today, but yes, was there like a specific moment in that, in practicing law or starting to understand that this is going to be your life? Was there a specific moment that you said, okay, this is not going to be my future? Is there something specific?
I'm a writer, and yeah, and I like to craft a narrative around like big moments, and I think that makes for a good story. It's just not the reality of my life. Right. I haven't had any like sort of epiphanies or big moments or come to Jesus encounters. It's just it's usually these things kind of are they're slower. It's more like a a crock pot rather than a microwave.
Right. Okay. But you're basically seeing what you're gonna need to do as an intern or whatever, and you're like, this is just not gonna be it.
In politics or?
Well, before that, like in law school.
Oh God, no. I mean, yeah, no. I would go to work for a law firm, in the summer to make some money, and I was like, oh my God, this is so boring. Like,
Okay.
who would want to do this? Yeah. So that was not like some kind of traumatic wrestling. That was
Right.
just like, oh man.
This can't
I
be
think
daily life.
if I was smarter, a little less risk averse when I was younger, I probably would have waited to go to law school and might not have gone at all. If I was one of those people who had gone to law school like when they were 30 or something like that, first of all, I might not have gone. If I had
Right.
waited, I might not have gone, which is probably could be a great decision. And if I had gone, I think I would have gotten a lot more out of it and enjoyed it a lot more if I had waited. But the idea of going when you're that young and you don't know
Right.
anything and you're just, whatever, you're just kind of a cork bobbing along on the surface of the ocean.
I love that metaphor. So how did you land? So you decide to go to politics, and somehow you land like a dream opportunity to be speechwriter for Vice President Al Gore. Like, how the heck did that happen, Daniel?
Well, I mean, again, everything, it happens in a nonlinear, half-assed kind of way, as many things do. One of the things about politics, which I really liked, the mechanics of politics, is that things move fast, and it's not entirely, but it's kind of a meritocracy internally because especially in campaigns, because like there's winners and losers,
Right.
and essentially what happened, and it's also very fast moving, which I like that, and it's also very low paid, so the people in it tend to be younger than you would ever expect, and so I went in, younger than I would.
Right.
I went in when I would younger.
Right.
Doing things at an age that I would never have expected. And basically, I became a speechwriter because at some point, I don't even remember when, I don't even remember this as a moment, somebody turned to me and said, can you write a speech? And one of the things that I intuited, but which I now specifically instruct my own kids and others, is that when somebody asks you that question, the answer is yes.
Right.
Whether you can do it or not, the answer is yes, and then you freaking figure it out. So I was at an intuitive sense that the answer to that question should be yes, and I said yes, and I wrote a speech. It was probably okay, and then they said, "Can you do it again?" And I was like, "Yeah." "Can you do it again?" "Yeah." And suddenly that was my job, and because again, it's low paid and fast moving. So I started doing that, and then. There aren't that many people who write speeches. And so when there's turnover, there's a limited supply of people who are eligible for that kind of job. And it turned out that was actually, I mean, again, I don't want to toot my own horn here, even though I'm about to. It's like, I was actually a pretty good speechwriter.
I'm sure you were.
Yeah, I'm not bullshitting. I was actually pretty good at it. I was, to my surprise, like it wasn't something I set out to do, but It's like, oh, I get this. And I think that's another sort of lesson for leapers out there is that, there are certain things that we are good at and certain things that we're not. There are certain things, and you can get better at almost anything, but there are certain things that feel like a native language in a way. There's certain things that, so there are other kinds of things that for me, I could learn how to do it, but I would do it in a kind of clumsy way. And it just turned out that speechwriting was something that I sort of had a feel for.
Right.
In the way that some people have a feel for physics, which I do not, or some people have a feel for tennis, which I do not.
I agree 1,000%. We call it the zone of genius, and I think it's just it's exactly it. Like somehow that power of words, storytelling, persuasion, impact that creates, like somehow that gelled with you, and it almost looks like all those pieces, like the linguistics, the libraries, like everything came together to create that magic. Essentially. So you're writing these speeches, but at some point you decide that politics is not your thing. It's not going to be the thing. Tell us a little bit about that time, first of all, in politics, but also we'll talk about moving away from it. So that is not so much that's not, again, that was less of a moment because I don't have these moments, these epiphanies, but sort of a slow hunch. And so basically what happened was this, is that I really liked the people I worked with, and I was very fortunate, especially later when I was working in politics, to work for like big bosses who were good.
So I worked for the then Labor Secretary Robert Reich. I worked for Vice President Gore. Those are two good guys,
Right.
and those are two good people to work for. Like that's not that was not it at all. And
Right.
and actually, my colleagues were outstanding. I really liked my colleagues. What I didn't like were some other things. Number one was that I did get a sense that politics. This is a long time ago now. That it was all about like tactical short-term advantage, and it wasn't. There was nothing it's sort of like a doctor who goes in and says, she says, I became a doctor to take care of people. And she spends all of her life dealing with like electronic medical records and insurance paperwork. You know what I mean? And it was sort of analogous to that. It's like, oh my gosh, all we're doing here is like, we're seeing about this far out. We're seeing one news cycle out.
Right.
And there isn't really a great strategy or vision because of the nature of the system. So that was one thing that really was kind of discouraging. The second thing that was not discouraging, but the second thing was sort of a discovering about oneself is that I don't like having a boss. And my bosses were okay. They were not like, they were good people. I didn't have any, generally. But it's like, I don't want someone telling me what I was going to work on and what I was not going to work on. Like I don't want to do that. And then the other thing that happened was that. So that's another thing. Another thing is that I had, especially true because when I was working for the VP, my wife and I had our first kid, and that changed my life. And so it was like, wait a second, I'm like killing myself for this short-term thing and not having any autonomy, and I don't get to see my little girl. I don't like this. And then even worse is that I would look sort of prospectively and say, what is the me 10 years from now going to do if he stays on this trajectory? And I was like, oh my God, I don't want to do that. And so I basically had a kind of, that was in some ways a come to Jesus moment, and I quit. Now again, I don't want to sound like too much of a renegade because my wife kept her job. She kept her health insurance. We had a plan where because I wasn't bringing in like that much money. We had a plan, and the plan was that we're trying to try it for. I wanted to go out and do my own writing, and we'll go out and try it for a couple of years and see if it works. And if it didn't work, I'd go back and get a job. But she's not giving up her job. She's not giving up her health insurance. One of my if there's a superpower that I have, it is frugality. So I don't spend a lot of money, and so we just sort of stumbled our way into figuring out how to make it work.
Incredible. Was it scary, Daniel? Do you remember?
I didn't actually find it very scary. I mean, I should have probably. Maybe because I was clueless. Here's the thing, Ilana. I mean, I'm not joking. I'm totally not joking about this. Like I did, like when I went to work for myself, basically leaving a job and then going to work in the attic of our house. I had a negative net worth, and now the good news is that at the time, I don't think I knew what a net worth was. I didn't know that. All right. I just know retrospectively, it's like, holy crap, you did this with a negative net worth. Because I owed more than I was worth. And I did, and I might do it again. So it didn't feel especially, it actually didn't feel especially scary, honestly.
Right. Well, sometimes when we're young, we do these things and we don't even realize that it should have been scary, or maybe sometimes we don't even realize how hard it's going to be.
I didn't realize. I think that's a different thing. That is like discovering that something is harder than you expect is a reality, and I think I definitely did encounter that. But the being frightened beforehand wasn't a big thing. In part because I planned it out, and basically I looked at it very, very rationally. Again, we still had an income coming in. We still had health insurance. We were not big spenders. And also there was a plan B in the sense that I knew that I had the skills where I could always go find another job. I was not worried that I was going to be unemployable.
Right.
I wasn't worried about that.
But so take me there for a second. So a book takes time, right? I mean, I'm still, I'm just now finishing my first, so I have so much respect. Like it's incredible. But the book takes time. So meanwhile, like, is there like a nagging, like, oh my God, should I get a regular job? Or is it just a passion? Because I think, then you came with Free Agent Nation in 2001, and then A Whole New Mind in 2004, and it might not be completely accurate, but that's kind of right. But Is there like, oh my God, like, can I do this? Any dilemmas, or no? You're like, oh my God, I'm living a dream.
It's neither one of those. It's neither sort of dark nights of the soul where I'm wondering whether I can do this, nor is it this kind of blissful thing. It's neither one of those. It's I have a job to do. I have something I care about, so get to work, and then do it the next day, and do it and do it the next day. It's just, I didn't spend a lot of time on either of those polls because I didn't spend a lot of time pondering it. I just was doing shit, and so that's what it was. That's what it was for me. Now, again, just to be very clear about this, when I first started out, I couldn't make enough money as a writer, and so I actually took on some like corporate speech writing, which I hated, but paid for diapers. Right. So I did. So that was like a side gig. That was a side gig for about a year or so until I sort of found my footing as a writer, and then also managed to get a book deal that paid in advance that covered us sort of, kind of, partially, kind of, sort of. And again, you're just like. When you're, I was in my early 30s, we had one baby, then we had another baby. I'm working for myself. My wife is practicing, litigating on behalf of the United States Department of Justice. You're just like trying to get through each day. Right. You're not, I mean it. I mean, you're just not thinking about, oh my God, is this a source of meaning? Oh my God, I'm living the dream. Oh my God, I'm so scared. You're saying, what is the mess in front of me that I need, professionally or personally, that I need to clean up right now?
Right now. That is very true. I was there as well. Okay, so then at some point you're starting to research your writing for Drive, and you uncover really what motivates people, right? And that becomes like this game changer. First of all, did you realize that it's going to become a game changer, or was it just something that you were passionate about and you understood that, sticks and carrots, and you have a beautiful TED Talk about it, but this is not the right way to do it? Did you know it's
well, no, at that point, I had, let me think here. So I wrote Free Agent Nation. And so I got that out of me. Basically, I wrote a book and I learned how to write a book. That's really important. Right. And I also basically, I showed myself and I showed the world that I can do this. Then I wrote A Whole New Mind. Right. And A Whole New Mind, A Whole New Mind did very well commercially, knock wood. And so that, that at least helped. I mean, I always believe the wolf is at the door, but that mitigated that fear for, a little bit. And then I wrote a graphic novel. My family and I went to Japan to study the manga industry. In 2007, I got a fellowship because our kids were little. They were very portable. And I said, let's go to Japan. And so we got a fellowship to go to Japan, and I studied the manga industry, the comic industry, because I was very interested in that. And then came back and wrote this graphic novel career guide, which was a hoot. And then after A Whole New Mind, I got a lot of questions from readers about, like, if you're right that we're moving from a world that prizes logical linear skills to one that prizes artistic empathic skills, and how do you lead people, how do you motivate people to do it? I didn't know the answer to that. I started looking at the research, and the research said some things that were shocking to me about the limits of some of these if-then rewards, and about how rewards can sometimes backfire. Right. And how there are other things that actually lead to sustained, enduring high performance. I thought it was fascinating. And so I just, it
is fascinating. I mean,
as you know from writing a book yourself, it's a giant pain in the ass to write a book. And so you have to pick something that you're genuinely interested in. And I was genuinely interested in this, and I wanted to figure it out. And that's what I did. So so I wrote that book. And then, it's like, again, the goal is to, for me at least, until recently, is as I think about making a different kind of leap myself, the goal is in writing books is to be able to write another one. That's the main goal. And so that's what was firing me on that one.
Amazing. So, and that becomes this kind of a phenomenal. People are coming to you and saying how it's reshaped organizations, and your TED Talk is one of the most, I don't know, seen talks of all times or whatever, with many, many millions of views. Why do you think it resonated so much? And did you realize that it's going to make such a big impact? Which
I think that it resonated because it gave language, and relatively simple and straightforward language, and an explanation to a phenomenon that people felt intuitively. They had a sense that they knew deep down that they were not motivated only by carrots and sticks. And they had a sense that a system constructed so heavily on that was somehow off. But they didn't have the language. They didn't have the language quite to describe it. And so I think it was a combination of giving people language to describe these inchoate feelings, and also giving evidence for this claim that shouldn't be counterintuitive, but that is.
And I think that's part of why your TED Talk also did so well, right? Because it was so simple to follow. And on the other hand, it's like, how did we get it all wrong, right? Because our instinct is always like, let's pay for your, and give you accolades and pay for it. But that's actually not what motivates people, which, I found fascinating as well.
Right. I mean, rewards do motivate people. It's just that, and if you're in an organization, you want to pay people really well. But the idea that you can that you're going to get better performance by dangling a high stakes reward in front of somebody is all the time is just not true.
Right. And sometimes it actually kills creativity.
Sometimes it hurts.
Yeah. And that was, fascinating. So I'll take you forward then, because that's I think put a lot of what put you on a bigger scale map. Am I right? Or this one was, definitely opened up a ton, right?
The truth is
coming.
The truth is that A Whole New Mind has sold as many books as Drive.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So I think I heard about you in Whole New Mind, but then when the TED Talk came with this, it felt like it was just like, whoa. So that's interesting to hear. Okay. So at that point,
I just think that Drive came out around the time that Drive came out in this in the midst of the smartphone era rather than before. So there's people just heard about more stuff more quickly.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I do want to talk about it a little bit, in terms of how you change marketing. And we'll talk about it in a second when I will talk about your latest book. But one question about your book, When, for my audience, this is really relevant, because when you're exploring basically the science of timing, right? You keep looking for different topics. I love that. It's so fascinating. And this book, it's more about timing. And sometimes it's timing of a day, sometimes it's timing throughout a project. And you elaborate really beautifully there. But one thing I do want to talk about is the tricky middle. And I think this is really, really interesting, because everybody will deal with midpoint slumps and with how do you motivate yourself when you really feel like, you know what, that's it. I'm done. And sometimes these are really, really hard. I think a lot of people are talking about the start, but not necessarily the hard middle. And I love that you did that.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about that book, and also kind of how do you recover through these midpoints?
Sure. So, I had another book that came out before that called To Sell is Human. And that was basically about the science of selling, because I was interested in that. And then after that, I said, I'll just give you the genesis of the book, When. And it was, again, like the genesis of the other stuff. It's just something that I was curious about. I realized in writing, before I wrote that book, that I was making all kinds of decisions about timing in a given day. Like, when do I start my work? When do I quit for the day? When do I start a project? What do I do in the middle of a project when I'm not sure it's going to work? Do I quit? Do I go forward? How do I summon the motivation to do something when I'm in that messy middle, as you say? And so I was making all these questions about timing, and I was doing it in a completely blind, intuitive, half-assed way. And so I said, there's got to be some like someone's written a book about this. And so I started looking around for the book, and no one had written a book about it. And I was like, oh man, you know what? I need to read this book, and the only way I can read this book is if I write this book. And so what I did is I looked at a very large number of studies on timing, asking these timing questions. And the thing about these timing questions is that they were spread across many, many, many disciplines. They were in psychology, they were in economics, but they were also in neuroscience, they were in anesthesiology, but they were also often asking very similar questions. How does our behavior and our performance change, our mood change over the course of a day? How do breaks affect us? How do beginnings affect us? How do midpoints affect us? How do endings affect us? How do people synchronize? And so I wrote that book largely so I could read it because I was interested in it. So on your question of midpoints, yeah, I mean, one of the things is that, our lives are episodic in a way that so much of what we do has a beginning, a middle, and an end. This interview has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Any kind of project has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And those episodic moments change us in a way. And so for midpoints, midpoints can drag us down. There's no question about it. There can be kind of a droop at the midpoint. We saw that until recently, just a sort of a U-shaped curve of well-being over time, where people in the middle of their lives were the most unhappy. Some of that data has changed recently not because people in the middle have gotten happier, but because people who are younger have gotten way less happy.
That's sad. That's
no, I mean
sad
it.
research.
So instead of it looking like a U, it looks like just a decline.
Oh no.
Or it looks like everybody, everybody's unhappy until you get old, and then.
And then there's regret. So we'll talk about.
Let me answer the question you actually asked, which is like, what do you do at midpoint? So there are a few things that you can do. I think there's some pretty good research showing that the way you frame it can be really important. So that and I use this sometimes for running. Let's say I'm going to go run 5 miles. During the first 2.5 miles till you get to the midpoint, you motivate yourself better by thinking about how far you've come. So, oh my gosh, I've already gone a mile. I've already gone 2 miles. And then when you're past the midpoint, you actually get more motivation by imagining how little you have to go. So that can be really useful. Another thing that you can do in the midpoint is actually create a set of sort of smaller, shorter moments. And so what you can do is you can say you're writing a book and you're not sure exactly what the midpoint is. Basically say, what I want to do is I want to get to the end of this section. I want to get to the end of this chapter. Mm-hmm. And that can give you the motivation, even if you're not at the end of the book itself. So slicing into smaller things. There's some interesting research from the NBA about the NBA done by Jonah Berger and Devin Pope showing that teams that are like 1 point behind, teams that are ahead at halftime in the NBA are more likely to win the game. Not surprisingly, right. But teams that are behind by one are actually more likely to win than teams that are ahead by one. And there's other experimental evidence showing that if you feel like you're slightly behind in the middle, you get some extra motivation. So if you feel like you're way behind, you give up. If you feel like you're way ahead, you can become complacent. But if you just feel like you're a little bit behind, and so having that thin edge of hunger and feeling a little bit behind in the middle can be helpful.
Ooh, I love that term. Thin edge of hunger. I love that. So let's go to your recent book, The Power of Regret. I think normalizing regret is a really interesting thing. And I love how you're talking about looking backwards takes us forward. We see a lot of regret with people when they're trying to kind of recap their career and trying to think where they made different decisions. So I would love to talk a little bit about it. You have different kind of the 4 types of regret. Can we talk a little bit about that, Daniel?
Of course.
And what made you even start this kind of a book?
I had regrets. First. I mean, it's that simple. Again, your charting is very therapeutic for me, Ilana, sort of to talk about how all of it's evolved. But This is not a book that I would have written in my 30s.
Right.
I would not have written a book about regret in my 30s, but in my 50s, it felt in some ways inevitable because I had, you know, um, if you hit age 50, you likely have more of your life behind you than ahead of you. Not necessarily, but likely.
Right.
And so I had a lot of room to look back, and I look back as people do. And when I look back, there were things I wish I had done. There were things I wish I hadn't done. There were things I wish I had done differently. And I was curious about that. And
Is there
one of the,
something specific that comes to mind when
well,
you
I
think
mean,
about
I
it?
mean, there was a catalyst in that I really started thinking about this deeply at my elder daughter's college graduation, because it was that kind of marker is very meaningful because I look at I'm in this graduation
Amazing.
ceremony and I see this kid, not a kid, this young woman,
How did
and
that happen?
exactly precisely the question I asked. How the hell did that happen? Like this kid used to be like an infant. This is the same kid we're talking about, like being born and then they're writing Free Asian
Right.
Nation. It's like crawling up the stairs of my attic office, and suddenly she's walking across the stage in a college graduation, and that I blinked
Wow.
and that happened, and so that's kind of disorienting. And then also else is like, how can I have a kid? How can I have a daughter who's 22 years old when I'm like 25 myself?
Exactly.
And and so, and I started thinking about, in particular, about my own college experience, which was generally quite positive. But there was something, I had some regrets about that. And
Hmm.
anyway, when I came back home to Washington, D.C., where I live, really thinking, this is a moment where I was thinking a lot about regret. I realized it's like, oh my God, I don't want to talk about this with anybody because nobody wants to talk about regret. And I sheepishly mentioned my regrets to a few people. And I discovered that everybody wanted to talk about it. That once I brought up regrets, it just uncorked this
Right.
need that other people had, and that's a very interesting reaction when you're a writer. And so I decided that I would I actually threw away a book that I was working on, and then wrote an entirely new proposal for a book about regret,
Uh-huh.
and and um, and so that's what I decided to do.
That's amazing. So you have this not epiphany, but you realize that regret is something that you
This
should
was the
look at.
closest. This is the closest thing I have to a moment.
Okay.
This is the closest thing I have to a moment where I was going one way and I reached that moment and then went the other way.
So you go there and you realize that more people want to talk about regrets.
Yeah.
And do you feel there's a difference between little regrets that you can just kind of look back and learn from versus the scary regret of getting to the end of your life and having massive regret over your life? Like, is there a
Oh,
difference?
that's interesting. I mean, I think so. There are differences among regrets on a number of different dimensions. I do think that what you're talking about, what you're talking about there is a difference between sort of retrospective regrets and prospective regrets. So,
Right.
if you look retrospectively, there are some things that you shouldn't regret every mistake that you made. You'll drive yourself crazy. And I think one of the discoveries is that a lot of the decisions we make don't really matter all that much. So, and then there's certain kinds of regrets that people have that are not massive, that are small. They can make peace with them. They don't really bug people. Um, when you're when you're thinking about the end of your life and getting there without deep regrets, I think that's a different kind of reasoning, and
Right.
I think it can be healthy, but it has to be done in the right way. So it depends on whether you know you look backward. If you're looking backward and scrutinizing your choices of what you did or didn't do, that's one thing. If you're looking forward and
Right.
trying to avoid future regrets, that's something else.
And I love that you said that. Yes, because I love the distinction. And you do talk about foundation, boldness, moral
Yeah.
connection. Can you elaborate just a little bit because there you're right. There's such different types of regrets
Yeah.
and talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Let me just show my work here a little bit. So to write this book, what I did was I looked at. There's a lot of good research on regret, and multidisciplinary research. Again, a lot of it in social psychology. It actually started out in almost like political science, political economy, national security studies. There's a lot in economics. There's a lot now in psychology and social psychology, but there's also a lot in neuroscience and cognitive science. And so looked at what is 50 years of research tell us about this emotion of regret. Then I also did a very large quantitative survey, basically a very large public opinion poll, the largest public opinion poll ever. Well, I did two things. I did a quantitative poll of the largest public opinion survey ever conducted of American attitudes about regret. And then I collected regrets from around the world. And that proved to be really revelatory because we have this database now of 26,000 regrets from people in 134 countries. And what it says, to answer your question again, in my typically roundabout way, is that yes, indeed, Ilana, we did find that around the world, there are 4 types of regret. There are foundation regrets, which are decisions that people make, smallish decisions that people make early in life that accumulate. They're not devastating up front, but that accumulate to bad consequences. I spent too much and saved too little. Now I'm broke. There's regrets about boldness, which is a very big category where you are at a moment in your life and you say, you could play it safe or take the chance. And overwhelmingly, people who don't take the chance regret it. Not always, but overwhelmingly. There's moral regrets, which are, if only I'd done the right thing. Right. So once again, you have a choice. I can take the high road. I can take the low road. I can do the right thing. I can do the wrong thing. Overwhelmingly, again, not all the time, but people regret taking the low road, doing the wrong thing. It sticks with them. And then finally, there are regrets of connection, which are, if only I'd reached out. And these are regrets about relationships that come apart and you want to do something, but you're too scared to do something. And your forecasting is off about how other people are going to respond. And so these 4 regrets are incredibly common around the world.
And I agree. And I can totally see them also for us and for the list. I mean, the listeners will have all sort of regrets, right? But I think that I made the wrong choices. I put myself in an industry that I can't remove myself from. I jumped to entrepreneurship and now I'm broke. Or, of course, I married the wrong person. Like, that will happen as well, right? But I'm just saying, like, it's interesting even, if I look at it from the lens of Leap Academy is how many people have small regrets or big regrets around decisions that they made or lack of decision. I think this is also something beautiful that you say in the book. Actually, lack of decision almost is more common than making a decision.
What we know from my quantitative research and what we also know from other research is exactly that distinction. So in the again, forgive me for getting in the weeds here, but
no, I love that.
I did something called the World Regret Survey, which was basically a giant collection of regrets from all over the world. That's what we were just talking about. That's a qualitative piece of research. I also did a pretty sophisticated public opinion survey of a sample of about 4,400 Americans, asking them a set of questions that you might get from a pollster about attitudes to regret. That's a very large sample, 4,400, for this kind of research. And the reason that the sample is so large is that my main goal was to look for demographic differences in regret. So do women have different regrets than men? Do people with lots of formal education have different regrets than people with less formal education? I found very few demographic differences except for one, and that had to do with this what you're talking about here. So in the architecture of regret, there can be 2 kinds of regrets. There are regrets of action. I regret something I did. Regrets of inaction. I regret something I didn't do. Action, inaction. When people in their 20s tended to have equal numbers of people in their 20s had equal numbers of regrets of action and inaction. But as people age, in the 30s, there are more inaction regrets than action regrets. 40s, even more inaction. By the time you get to your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, it's overwhelming. Overwhelmingly. Oh, as we age, there are more inaction regrets than action regrets. There is zero. I mean, I don't want to think about this as like akin to the law of gravity, but in the world of social science, this is as close to a unshakable truth as you could possibly have, which is that over time, people are much more likely to regret their inactions over their actions. It's not even close.
Wow.
Inaction regrets are what stick with us.
That is,
and it
so
could be
powerful.
anything. It could be anything. If only I'd started a business. If only I'd asked that person out on a date. If only I had traveled over here, which is a place that I wanted to travel to earlier. If only I had spoken up.
And what do you tell them?
Inaction.
Like, what do you tell them? So once you find that regret, because again, you say you're first of all just talking about or recognizing that it's something that you wish is the first step. But after that, what do you do?
Depends. I mean, give me an example of something that somebody like a Leap Academy person might regret.
All of
and
that,
I'll-
yeah. All of the,
and
so yeah. I don't know. I quit my job and now I can't find another one. Or I wanted to go to entrepreneurship, now I'm broke. One of those.
Okay, so let's take the first one. So that's
Or maybe
that's
I'm not this. No,
that's a regret of action.
Sorry. I had this amazing idea and I didn't go after it. Sorry.
Bingo.
Yes.
Okay, there you go. So and that's a very common regret.
Very common.
And it's actually much more common than people who regret trying stuff and failing.
Right.
It's much more common than that. And even there were people in the database who tried something, let's say entrepreneurship, it went south on them. They regretted doing that. But I also did a lot of interviews, and there are people who said, I tried it, it didn't work. I didn't like that, but I'm glad I tried. So let's say you have I had a great idea, but I never moved on it. All right. So there's we know from the science, there's a way to deal with that. So number one is how you treat yourself and that kind of thing. And what our tendency, and probably you hear it in the sort of the Leap Academy people hear it
right.
in their own self-talk, which is, I'm such an idiot. I'm so lazy.
Right.
I'm such a weakling. I'm such a wimp.
I'm a failure.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like the way we talk to ourselves it's horrible.
Worst.
It's the worst. It's far harsher than we talk to
anybody.
Than we would ever talk to anybody else. Okay. Right. So here's what the science says about that. Don't do that. All right. That's basically what the science concludes. And what it says, and the reason not to do that is that it's not effective.
Right.
I mean, this lacerating self-criticism doesn't it doesn't improve performance. If it did, God bless America, let's go for it. But it doesn't. All right? It typically has no effect on performance. It has an effect on your mood. It makes you feel worse, but it has no effect on your performance. And so don't do that. What does have an effect on your performance is something very different, something I didn't know about until I did this research, which is something called self-compassion, which essentially is treating yourself with kindness rather than contempt. Don't treat yourself worse than anybody else, but don't treat yourself better than anybody else. I mean, don't treat yourself better than anybody else, but don't treat yourself worse than anybody else. That's what I meant to say.
Right.
And so treat yourself with kindness rather than contempt. Recognize that regrets are part of the human condition. Everybody has regrets. It's one of the most common emotions that people have. There's almost nobody who's not 5 years old or brain damaged or a sociopath who doesn't have any regrets. So treat yourself with kindness. You're not that special. Give me any regret that you have. Any of your listeners have a regret, I'll find it in 15 seconds in the database. And so treat yourself with kindness rather than contempt. The second thing, which I think is really important, is writing about your regret, talking about your regret. Not only is it a way to sort of relieve the burden, but there's some interesting research that shows that when we take this kind of amorphous dread of a feeling, which is abstract, and convert it to words, which are more concrete, they're actually less menacing. And so a lot of research about converting these blobby, amorphous kinds of feelings into actual words, which can help us in sense making. And then finally, what you have to do is you have to stop and extract a lesson from it. So, and what are you going to do? So basically, what it is for your person, it's this. First of all, you regret like not starting you're not trying something on your own. All right, trying something yourself. So first of all, treat yourself with kindness. You're not the only one like that. Okay, people make mistakes. That's how it works. Number two, tell people about that regret. Try to make sense of it. Talk about it. Write about it. And then third, it's like this is a pretty strong signal.
What are you going to do next?
Right, exactly. This is a strong signal. We make all kinds of decisions every single day, and most of them we don't remember. But here's an indecision that is haunting you. That's a strong signal. So the question is basically what it says is that you value. What's the lesson? You might value independence more than you think. You might value risk more than you think. You might value creation more than you think. Listen to that signal. And then the question is like, what's the next thing that you can do? And so maybe what it is in this case is go meet with 5 entrepreneurs and get their advice. Give yourself a deadline. In the next 2 weeks, write a business plan for something you're interested in. Go take a course on entrepreneurship, like basically extract a lesson. The lesson is, this is something that's valuable to me and something that I want to pursue, and then do something about it. And what you don't want to do is beat yourself up for not doing it until now. That doesn't do you any good.
That's useless. Yeah. And I love that you said that, right? Because the clarity will also come from action, right? So when you get into that
I
momentum.
agree with that completely.
And
I think that's a great way to put it. I mean, we get a lot of clarity from action.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is just normalizing regret, right? Being able to look it in the mirror, say it out loud. The one thing that
Exactly.
I thought when I was listening to that, and again, it depends how you look at regret and if it's a little more raw. I think it's easier to talk about things from the scars and from the wounds. So I think when somebody's like, something is like right now in the middle of hurting really, really bad,
Absolutely.
sometimes it's really, really hard to talk about it. So I think that was the one thing that I was like, ooh, how do I help somebody when it's like bleeding right now to talk about it?
But what do you do? I mean, you just extend your metaphor. You stop the bleeding.
Yeah.
You know, that's what you do. If it's like a physical wound, and you don't begin the sense making or the lesson extraction when someone has a gaping wound that's
Right.
bleeding.
This is not the right time.
It's not the right time. But when the scar tissue starts to emerge, that's when you can begin. That's when you can begin deriving. That's when you can begin deriving lessons from it.
I love that. Anyway, Daniel, I definitely want everybody to listen to this book. Maybe just before we end, I do have a curiosity question. So
Lay it on me.
So how do you decide now, like now you have the book out, you're marketing the book. First of all, do you notice a difference between needing to market it now versus a decade ago? And then I have a follow-up question to that.
It is marketing a book is always a ferocious battle. Doesn't matter when or who or where. It's always a battle.
Always. Okay. So how do you then, first of all, then motivate yourself to then write another book? Like, does it ever get like, oh my God, not again? Or is it then you just fall in love with another idea and you're like, I can't wait to write about that?
I would never write a book just to write a book. I would never say it's time for me to write another book. I would have to be, it's something that I want to work on. And so that's why I haven't started working on a new book, and instead have been trying to work on some other kinds of projects that speak to me more clearly, right now. So that's what it is. And again, this is where, and I'm totally not joking about this. This is where being frugal is helpful. Not having very high carrying costs. I'm talking to you today from my garage office. I have never paid rent. I've been working for myself for 25 years. I've never paid rent for an office to anybody else. And so, you have to think about, you have to be very clear about what do you care about? And what I care about is doing stuff that I find interesting.
Right.
That's it. And so it doesn't have to be the biggest. It doesn't have to be the biggest. I'm not trying to build a giant enterprise. I don't care if I have people reporting to me or not. I just want to work on cool stuff. I want to make stuff, put it out in the world. That's it. And that's a hard gig. So don't waste your money.
But it's a beautiful gig.
Have low overhead.
I love that, Daniel. What would you want? And by the way, for people who are seeing us on YouTube, like it's really beautiful to see all those books and all the things. So you're in a really beautiful.
It's just a refurbished garage. You can see here.
You're in a really beautiful spot here. So I wish everybody had a garage like this. But Daniel, what would be something that you wish somebody told you earlier in your career that would have helped you?
It's a great question. And I think that when I was much younger, I don't know whether I would have listened. And that bugs me. You know what I mean? And I don't think I'm alone in that necessarily.
No.
But sort of bypassing that, I think it would be like, no one is thinking about you. No one is watching you. No one is evaluating you. I think a lot of times early in our lives, we are concerned what other people think of us. Right. And I certainly was concerned about that. And then eventually I discovered what people were thinking about me, which is that they weren't thinking about me. Nobody was thinking about me. They were thinking about themselves. And so, there's a liberation in that.
Oh my God. I think what you just said, Daniel, is actually so, so, so important to everybody listening, because so many times they're not taking action because of what society thinks, what people will think, what family will say, what their friends will say. And I think they're just, that's the biggest, stopper that we see.
First of all, most people aren't thinking about you. They really are not. And if they are, who cares?
Right.
They don't know you. They don't necessarily have your best interest in mind. So who cares? And there's a danger in living someone else's life. There's a big danger in that.
Yeah.
And I think people do it, and they do it it almost in a unintentional way. Like they're not being, if you say intentionally, I want to live the life that my mother wants for me, or my father wants for me, or whatever. Like I'm okay. In some ways I'm okay with that. But I think what people do is they do that unintentionally. They do it kind of passively. They do it.
But that's when they wake up with regret.
Bingo.
Ties into your book right up there. Daniel, thank you so much. I could probably talk to you for hours. So thank you for coming.
Well, thank you,
show.
Ilana. I've enjoyed the conversation. As I said, it was very therapeutic for me.
Thank you so much. More episodes that you're going to love are right around the corner. So definitely make sure to click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Also, who in your life should see this today? Do share this with them. This will inspire and help those you care about, and helps us continue to bring amazing guests. And I will see you there.